What's up, guys? Welcome back. Today we have the Arno Bernard Senior Orca. So if you're looking at this and saying, well, that looks like the iMamba, well, that's because this is an Arno Bernard, but it is the Arno Bernard Senior Orca. The Arno Bernard Knife Company is run by Arno Jr., and he's the president and principal kind of designer and knife maker there, and he works with his brothers. He has two brothers. I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but their father was the one that inspired Arno Jr. to start the company, and then his brothers to follow him and join him in the knife making. Now, it is my understanding that Arno Sr. Is still quite involved in the company. He does a lot of the handle material sourcing. This isn't a very hard material to source, but some of their other knives have some really cool handle materials. And he has been a full-time knife maker himself since the mid-90s, and he inspired his boys to kind of follow him with his knife making. He doesn't do a lot of knives anymore. This knife is made in the same shop as the other Arno Bernard knives, but this is Senior's design and kind of Senior's title knife. And because of that, each one of these Orcas that are out there are numbered and basically strong identity, like very individual knives. Like, I don't know if it's one that has this carbon fiber. It would be definitely one that has this specific design, because carbon fiber is cut and the pattern's going to be different. So that's a little bit of a history on that family. They are a South African knife making family, which South African knives have a huge pedigree in the whole knife making world. I think the best value customs come out of South Africa. And obviously some of the most well-known now American companies, i.e. Chris Reeve, started in South Africa and are South African immigrants to the U.S. So that's a little bit of history on the Arno Bernard knife company, but this is made there, but by Arno Bernard Sr., whose knife company is actually technically called, or was called, Arno Bernard Customs, not Arno Bernard Knife Company. So a little bit of history on those items. Let's get into this knife a little bit. We will talk about the different interesting items and just the details of the knife, and then we'll get into our EDC rating. First off, let's do a quick size comparison with our standard items. So first we've got the Paramilitary 2 and the Paramilitary 3. So as you can see, it's a full-size knife. It has a 3.4 inch blade, but because of that front choil, it's a 3-inch cutting edge. And then our guest size comparison for the day is the Chris Reeve large Sebenza 31 with black micarta inlays. Very similar in size. The Sebenza is a little bit longer, probably half a centimeter maybe longer. Bring it down here so the camera shift is less obvious, where you can see both sides of the camera shift. So there are the size comparisons. I brought this out because Arno Bernard, the iMamba at least, has been compared to the Sebenza and the other Chris Reeve knives as a flipper Sebenza. And this is quite similar looking to the iMamba, though I think this is a better, it seems like a more refined knife. I haven't had an iMamba, so I'll have to check one out to say that for sure. But yeah, so that's why I brought that out. We'll talk more about that at the end of this video. So let's talk about some of the kind of details, the materials, etc. It's obviously a tie frame lock. It has this lock bar insert. I love a good lock bar insert. It has these carbon fiber inlays. This is number 40. These are all numbered. It has a pretty cool kind of stubby back spacers plus lanyard hole thing. I love the way that looks. It has, Chicago style hardware where one end is blank, the other end is the actual screwing part. And then this really cool pivot that has a Orca engraved in it. And this is the Orca V2 is the name of this knife. I already said that, but and I think this knife kind of looks Orca-esque. Maybe that's me anthropomorphizing it because of the name, but I feel like this finger hole is like very Orca eye shaped and kind of has that sloped head shape of an Orca. But I don't know. I love Orcas, so I just love that pivot, and I think that's a really cool detail. It also has a stonewashed M390 hand ground blade. It's hand ground by the Bernards. I'm sure Senior did this, or I'm not sure. I would bet he did because he's a custom knife maker. And then it's got that kind of standard, I'd say it's pretty standard stone wash. And then this filigree on the blade that, just a little flare that I think looks nice. It's got jimping on top, a rounded spine, and it's got a very slight hollow grind, which I think is the best of both worlds with hollow grind because it's very slicey, but I don't feel like it's too paper thin where you're going to hurt the blade by using it. I think I said it's an M390, but if I didn't, it's an M390. It runs on bearings. Actually, specifically, it runs on skiff bearings. I love when makers are doing skiff bearings to straighten their knives. Skiff makes the best bearings and some really cool knives. I'm really trying to get my hands on a Skiff Fugitive. If you have one and you want to send it to me to check out, send me a note on Instagram and we can work something out. Or if you want to sell it. And then it has a kind of partially milled and partially stamped pocket clip with hidden hardware, which I think looks great. And it's super functional. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Another cool detail about these knives is that all of the hardware that they use is milled in-house. I love that. It's just a good little detail. The hardware all the way around uses T8, even the lock bar insert, which is cool. I'll talk more about that in a minute as well. The action is a flipper tab, which functions really well as the reverse flick. And honestly, I think that this knife doesn't need a flipper tab at all. It has one of the best reverse flick actions I've ever felt. It's just excellent. I think it just doesn't need a flipper tab. I'm not a hater of flipper tabs anymore. I used to be, but I carry Shiros a lot, and I like a good flipper tab. And it is a really good functional flipper tab. But with that absolutely super satisfying reverse flick on this, I don't know why you'd ever use a flipper tab. Although, actually, for utilitarian sake, a flipper tab with gloves is way easier than a reverse flick. So, it actually makes sense. I just really like the reverse flick on this, and it feels a little bit unnecessary to have that tab. Anyways, let's get into the ratings for this knife. First off, of course, we have carryability. This, the shape of the knife, it weighs 4.2 ounces. That factors into the carryability. So very normal weight. There's no milling on the inside or anything. But also the shape of the knife is not necessarily very narrow. It's thinner than the PM2 because the PM2's got a weird hump there, but thicker than the Sebenza because of the scales as well as the flipper tab. So the body shape is pretty average, but this pocket clip is truly an excellent pocket clip. So it's getting an extra 2 points for that. It makes the knife above average to carry just because of the pocket clip. So carryability of a 7, and the reason for that is that this upswedge is super aggressive, and though that might seem like it'd be annoying, it's not. It doesn't affect the ergos at all. I don't feel that somehow. I think it sits perfectly in this crease right here when I'm holding the knife, and then shifts back. Yeah, it shifts back like between my ring finger and my middle finger when I'm holding it at the front choil. But what that means is that this knife goes so easily into the pocket of any pants. And that might seem like a minor thing, but to me that's a really big deal. I work an office job, but I have property, so I'm often during the week I'm wearing appropriate casual work attire, right? Nice jeans, or sometimes some I don't know, just normal office work attire that's like not a suit, but they're thinner pants. But then during the weekend when I'm home, I'm again often outside working the property and doing things in the woods and such. And I'm wearing like thick Carhartt pants or really thick jeans. And so some of my knives that I carry at the office, I actually just don't carry when I'm at home on the weekend because they don't go well in and out of my pocket. An example of that actually is my Sebenza. So my Sebenza has a millet pocket clip on it, and this millet pocket clip looks fantastic. I wish the finish matched better, but I think it looks really good. But because of the lack of a ramp, really, there's a tiny one. It doesn't go into, work pants or any thicker pants well. What I ended up doing, and I really like carrying this, so I actually do carry this at home. But you end up having to kind of rotate the knife so it slides in. I don't know. It's hard to describe. So because of this pocket clip, like being equally great and having equally great retention, no matter the pants you're wearing, I think that carryability, that's why I got a high score in carryability. And that kind of is, insight to how I view carryability. Pocket clips matter. Next, we have usability. This also got a 7 for usability. And that's because this is super usable. I think it's like just like a excellently utilitarian knife. It's got M390 steel, which is a great steel to use. The ergos are really good. It's got this back point that feels nice in the hand, but really the key is this front choil. It's such a controlled, nice knife to use. That hollow grind being not super aggressive but still present means it slices nicely but feels tough, and it just feels locked in the hand. I think this is an excellent knife for like just normal use, and just everything about it, like it's just utilitarian, which I really appreciate. And I think that's kind of I feel like a lot of those South African knife makers are really thinking of design but utilitarian first. And so the usability for this is just, I would be very pleased to carry this every day. It's just a really good knife to use, good knife to deploy, good lock bar access, but it's just great. It's a great using knife, so it's got a 7 there. And then finally we've got our maintainability. It's pretty average maintainability for the most part, but I did give it a 6, and for a couple specific reasons. One is the pivot, all of the hardware is the same size. And what that means is that when you're just working on this knife and you're putting it back together and you're having to hold down the blade onto the lock bar so it doesn't bounce up, so you can put the hardware back in or whatever, you don't have to switch the bit with one hand. And that sounds like something weird and nitpicky, but I take apart a lot of knives, and when I've tightened the body screws or put the body screws in, and then I have to pop the bit out and get the right bit for the pivot hardware and do it one-handed, it just is one of those things that you notice after a while. You're like, because you're struggling to get that, and then this pops out as misaligned or whatever. So just having that same size is actually really nice. And then the other thing that gave it a higher than average maintainability score is the fact that it has those tungsten inserts under the bearings. So the tungsten inserts under the bearings make it so it's, oftentimes a maker, in order to make it so that the ceramic ball bearings don't wear into a handle, will put a steel washer there. And that's totally fine. That's definitely like good enough. But tungsten is like next level. It's much harder than steel. And it means that this knife will never in its lifetime ever develop channels. So or bearing channels that would potentially cause a blade to have some back and forth play. So having that super hard tungsten washer in there that the bearing rides on means that like the maintenance interval for this knife would be basically forever, because you're not going to ever have to send it back or put a thicker washer in there because you wore through or whatever. It just means that it's basically unchannelable with those bearings wearing into the titanium. By the way, if you're a knife maker putting bearings in a knife, make sure there's a washer ceramic bearings are so much harder than titanium that a lot of these knives that don't have it will develop channels in a few years, and they'll have this side-to-side play. So the fact that Arno Sr. did that with this knife, I think that's just super cool. So that gives us a score of a carry score of 7, a usability score of 7, a maintainability of 6, so a grand total of 20. And that's a great EDC score, and honestly, I would be happy to EDC this every day. But, I'm sick in the head, so I've got a ton of knives, so I always have to swap. But if you were like, hey, I want one nice and unique knife that is utilitarian but also cool, this would be honestly something I'd recommend. If you were asking for something like that, like I want something that, like, yeah, utilitarian but still cool and unique, and by a small maker, this would be a hard one not to recommend. So we've got through the score and all this stuff. I wanted to address something that was interesting that I've heard about the Arno Bernard knives, and that they are, Chris Reeve with a flipper. I think that does a disservice to both of these makers. There's some similarity that I see in, utilitarian and material finish and quality for sure. This is definitely more fine-tuned than you're going to get from a Chris Reeve, because these are numbered, right? And Chris Reeve it's a much bigger company than Arno Bernard. They are both technically South African, though Chris Reeve is in the U.S. now. Chris Reeve Sr. was a South African maker, but so I think they were cut from the same cloth, but comparing them is basically I think an analog for having a nice knife that is also very utilitarian. Obviously, the finishes on the handles are similar. And the stock clip on the Sebenza and Nkosi, all of them, actually has a similar shape to this. It's not as good as this. And you have this kind of saber-esque front. There are some similarities, but the similarities I think are a little bit blown out of proportion. But I think it's fair to make that comparison in some ways, because for me at least, there's a similar level of satisfaction using this Arno Bernard. They are extremely utilitarian, but they just are very well made, and they feel like a well-tuned machine that will handle basically anything you would want to throw at a folding knife. So I think that comparison is more like, oh, they're both South African and they both use this blasted finish. I think that's just kind of like why people say that. And if you're going to say it's similar to Chris Reeve because of quality and usability, then sure. But, there's a lot of quality and usable knives out there. And these just happen to be two of them, and they just happen to be from two makers that are of a similar heritage. The main actual similarity where you could say that, I would say, is the flat scales with the kind of aggressive beveling, but that, again, that there might be some inspiration from one or the other. Well, it would be, because Arno Bernard Sr. would have come up just a little bit after Chris Reeve, so there may be some inspiration there. But I think that calling it, the flipper Sebenza doesn't do service to the identity of either of these knives. Like, both of these knives have a very strong identity, I would think. Like, this is very much a Chris Reeve, and this is very much an Arno Bernard Sr., although it seems very similar to the Imamba, which I haven't handled myself. So I think just saying that would be more of a disservice to both of these knives individually. Are they both excellent utilitarian knives? Yes, 100%. Will you be happy with both? Yes, 100%. So in that way, they are similar, but they are very they are very individually designed and built knives. Great quality, both of them. you'd be happy to use both of them, but I don't really see the the Sabenta flipper thing. So anyways, that's kind of it for the Arno Bernard Senior Orca. I'm a big fan of this. It's a knife that's just kind of a pleasure to use. It's unique, but it also is utilitarian, and it's made by a excellent family of makers. Yeah, it's a good EDC. I'm happy with it. I'm happy that I've been able to carry it and check these out. I will have one of these in my collection sooner or later, this one or another one, I don't know, because I would be happy to have this in my rotation. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you. Wait, I have to close these. I always close it. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you on the next one.